What if I told you that the NBA just did one of the greatest point guards in history absolutely dirty? We're talking about Chris Paul, a 12-time All-Star, future Hall of Famer, and the only superstar of his caliber to never get a ring.
You just broke that Chris Paul has been moved to the Raptors.
And now, the league just straight up blackballed this man in the most disrespectful way possible. Word is, CP3 has some exclusive inside information about what really went down with the Raptors. And gang, what I'm about to break down for you is gonna expose exactly how this organization played him.
There are a lot of former players who say that Chris Paul saved their life.
This ain't just another retirement story. This is about how the NBA did a legend wrong, and Chris Paul himself just confirmed it. If you think this was just a simple business decision, you're dead wrong. The evidence I've uncovered shows this was calculated, cold, and downright disrespectful. Let me break down exactly what happened and why this whole situation is more messed up than anyone's talking about. Chris Paul's own retirement statement that just dropped: "This man got played harder than a pickup game at the local Y." The numbers don't lie. After 21 years in the league, over 12,000 assists, second all time, and being named to the NBA's 75th anniversary team, CP3 got shipped off to Toronto like he was some scrub. Here's what we know for real. On February 5th, 2026, the Clippers traded Chris Paul to the Raptors in a 3-team deal. But here's the kicker: CP3 never even reported to Toronto. The Raptors told him straight up, don't even bother showing up. Then today, February 13th, they officially waived him, and within hours, Chris Paul announced his retirement. Industry insiders are confirming what I've been saying. This wasn't about basketball. This was about money, disrespect, and a complete lack of regard for a future Hall of Famer. The exclusive reporting shows the Raptors were just using CP3 as a salary dump, and homie got caught in the crossfire of their financial gymnastics. Shams Charania and other NBA reporters have been breaking down the details, but what they're not telling you is the emotional impact this had on Chris Paul. In his retirement statement, you can feel the pain behind his words when he says, "As I write this, it's hard to really know what to feel." But to understand why this is so messed up, we gotta go back to the beginning and see how Chris Paul became the player he is today. And more importantly, how his leadership style and big mouth started working against him in this league. Here's where it gets real. Chris Paul's biggest strength was also his biggest weakness. This man had a mouth on him, pause no homo, and he wasn't afraid to use it. While other players stayed quiet and collected their checks, CP3 was out here holding teammates accountable, calling out coaches, and demanding excellence from everyone around him. In his own words from that retirement statement, "Leadership is hard and it's not for the weak. Some will like you and many people won't, but the goal was always the goal, and my intentions were always sincere." That's real talk right there, but it's also what started nerfing his career. Coaches and team owners don't like when players talk back. Even when they're right, they want yes men, not leaders who challenge the system. The evidence is all there if you look at his career trajectory. Every team CP3 went to, he made them better. New Orleans, the Clippers, Houston, Phoenix, Golden State, wherever this man went, winning followed. But somehow, he kept getting moved around like he was the problem. This is where the NBA's politics really started working against him. Front offices would rather have a quiet superstar who doesn't rock the boat than a vocal leader who demands accountability. Chris Paul represented old-school basketball values in a league that was becoming more about individual brands and social media presence. The irony is that every teammate who played with Chris Paul respected him. Blake Griffin, James Harden, Devin Booker, they all talk about how much CP3 taught them and how he made them better players. But the suits in the front office, they saw him as a problem that needed to be managed. Now let's talk about his time with the Clippers, because this is where the story gets really deep and where we can see how Chris Paul's leadership style both elevated and ultimately hurt his career. Chris Paul's stats as a Clipper were absolutely insane. We're talking about a dude who was putting up elite numbers while trying to drag that franchise out of mediocrity. During his 6 years in LA, CP3 averaged 18.8 points, 9.8 assists, and 4.3 rebounds per game. But more importantly, he transformed the Clippers from a joke organization into Lob City. Before Chris Paul got there, nobody was checking for the Clippers. LA was always a Lakers town, but CP3 changed that narrative. According to NBA analyst Ashley Nicole Moss, who broke this down perfectly, Chris Paul put the Lob City Clippers on the map. The Clippers were not a team that anybody was really checking for, and Chris Paul gets there along with Blake Griffin and really turns that organization into a team that people are talking about again. But let's get into the specifics of what Chris Paul was doing during those Clippers years that made him so valuable. In the 2013-14 season, He averaged 19.1 points and 10.7 assists while shooting 46.7% from the field and 36.8% from three. Those are elite numbers for any point guard, but for someone who was also playing elite defense and leading a team that had never been relevant, that's legendary stuff. The Lob City era wasn't just about the highlights and the dunks. It was about Chris Paul's basketball IQ and his ability to make everyone around him better. Blake Griffin became an all-star largely because of how Chris Paul set him up. DeAndre Jordan led the league in field goal percentage multiple times because CP3 knew exactly when and where to get him the ball. But here's where the leadership issues started becoming more apparent. There were constant reports about Chris Paul clashing with Doc Rivers over offensive schemes. CP3 wanted more ball movement and better shot selection, while Doc wanted to keep things simple and let the stars create. Both approaches had merit, but the friction was real. The media started painting Chris Paul as difficult to coach, someone who thought he knew better than his coaches. And you know what? Sometimes he probably did. Chris Paul's basketball IQ was off the charts, and he could see plays developing 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But in the NBA's hierarchy, players aren't supposed to challenge coaches, even when they're right. This is where we started seeing the narrative shift around Chris Paul. Instead of being celebrated as a floor general and leader, he was being portrayed as a control freak who was hard to work with. That narrative would follow him for the rest of his career and ultimately contribute to how he was treated in these final years. But here's what most people don't understand. That ring meant everything to Chris Paul. This wasn't just about personal accolades or individual success. For a player of his caliber, not having a championship is like having an incomplete legacy. Every great point guard before him, Magic Johnson, John Stockton, even guys like Tony Parker, they all got their rings. CP3 was supposed to be next. The man sacrificed everything for that goal. He dealt with injuries, meniscus tears, Jones fractures, separated shoulders, 5-hand surgeries, and kept showing up. In his retirement statement, he said, "The game always gave me a reason to show up. And the true leaders and fighters know that showing up is half of the battle." Let's talk about what Chris Paul went through physically to chase that championship. The hand surgeries alone would have ended most players' careers, but CP3 kept coming back. In 2016, he broke his hand in the playoffs against Portland, and instead of shutting it down, he played through it. That's the level of commitment we're talking about. The ring obsession became even more intense as Chris Paul got older. Every season that passed without a championship was another year closer to retirement, another opportunity lost. You could see it in his play. The urgency, the frustration when teammates didn't execute, the way he pushed himself and everyone around him to be perfect. This obsession also made him a target for criticism. When the Clippers couldn't get past the second round, Chris Paul got blamed for not being clutch enough. When Houston fell short against Golden State, it was CP3's fault for getting injured at the wrong time. This wasn't about basketball. This was pure business. And Chris Paul got caught in the middle of Toronto's financial problems in the most cold-blooded way possible. Here's the breakdown that exposes exactly how dirty this whole situation was. The Raptors were about $1 million over the luxury tax threshold at $187.9 million. They needed to dump Ochai Agbaji's $6.38 million contract to get under the tax and avoid paying millions in luxury tax penalties. So what did they do? They traded Agbaji plus a 2032 second-round pick to get Chris Paul's $2.2 million contract. But here's the disrespectful part that really shows how this league operates. They never intended for CP3 to actually play for them. From day one, the plan was to waive him. Bobby Webster, the Raptors GM, even confirmed they weren't going to ask Chris Paul to report to the team. They handled it professionally, but let's call it what it is. They used a Hall of Fame player as a salary dump. The 3-team trade that went down on February 5th, 2026 was structured like this. Clippers sent Chris Paul to the Raptors. Raptors sent Ochai Agbaji and a 2032 second-round pick to the Brooklyn Nets, and the Clippers got draft rights to Vanya Marinkovic. Look at that trade and tell me it makes basketball sense. The Raptors gave up a young player and a draft pick just to take on Chris Paul's contract, knowing they were going to immediately cut him. This wasn't about acquiring talent or improving their roster. This was about manipulating the salary cap system. And Chris Paul was just a pawn in their financial chess game. The man never even got the chance to mentor young players or contribute to the organization. They just took his contract, saved some money on luxury taxes, and sent him packing. What makes this even more disrespectful is the timing. Chris Paul had just spent the last 6 years away from his family, bouncing between different cities, chasing a championship. In his retirement statement, he specifically mentioned, "This last season, I knew I couldn't do it unless I was at home with my family. Those 6 years away were a lot of sacrifice for all of us, and I knew that had to come to an end." The Raptors knew this man was at the end of his career, knew he wanted to be close to his family, and still used him as a financial instrument. They could have at least given him the option to contribute, to be around the team, to finish his career with some dignity. Instead, they told him not to even bother showing up. The most insulting part is how they framed it as doing him a favor. "We're handling this professionally," they said. "We're not going to force him to report." But what they were really saying is, "We don't want you here. We just needed your contract to balance our books." When Chris Paul announced his retirement today, you could feel the emotion and pain in his statement, and it revealed so much about how this whole situation affected him mentally and emotionally. This wasn't how a legend was supposed to go out. No farewell tour, no proper send-off, just a quiet exit after getting waived by a team that never wanted him to play. In his statement, CP3 wrote, "As I write this, it's hard to really know what to feel, but for once, most people would be surprised I don't have the answer. But mostly, I'm filled with so much joy and gratitude." Now you can tell this man is trying to stay positive, trying to find the silver lining, but you know it hurts deep down. The man was carrying the weight of entire franchises on his shoulders, and when they came up short, he took the blame. But here's what's crazy. Chris Paul's teams were always competitive. The Clippers were legitimate contenders during the Lob City era. Houston took the Warriors to 7 games in the Western Conference Finals. Phoenix made it to the NBA Finals. This man was consistently putting teams in position to win championships. But basketball is a team sport, and sometimes the best player doesn't win. The closest Chris Paul came to getting his ring was with Phoenix in 2021. At 36 years old, he was playing some of the best basketball of his career, leading the Suns to their first finals appearance since 1993. But they lost to Milwaukee in 6 games, and you could see the devastation on CP3's face. He knew that might have been his last real chance. But here's where the NBA really did Chris Paul dirty. And this goes way back to what might be the most controversial decision in modern NBA history. Remember that 2011 trade that would have sent CP3 to the Lakers to team up with Kobe Bryant? David Stern vetoed that trade for basketball reasons, and that decision changed the entire trajectory of CP3's career and possibly cost him multiple championships. Ashley Nicole Moss said it best, "I truly believe that if David Stern does not veto that trade and he becomes a Los Angeles Laker, we're talking about Chris Paul with all of his accolades, and another accolade that would be on that list is NBA champion." The official reason given was that the trade wasn't good enough value for the Hornets, but everyone knew the real reason. Other owners complained that it would make the Lakers too powerful. Dan Gilbert, owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, literally wrote a letter to David Stern complaining about competitive balance. The irony is that these same owners had no problem with other super teams forming through free agency. From that moment on, it seemed like the league was working against Chris Paul. Every time he got close to a championship, something went wrong. The Clippers couldn't get over the hump. Houston came up short. And even when he finally made it to the finals with Phoenix, they lost to Milwaukee. But here's the deeper conspiracy. What if the NBA wanted Chris Paul to fail? Think about it from a business perspective. Chris Paul was outspoken, he challenged authority, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind about league policies. He was the president of the Players Association, fighting for player rights and better working conditions. The league might have seen him as a threat to their control. The veto of that Lakers trade wasn't just about competitive balance. It was about sending a message. The message was that the league could control player movement and that even superstars weren't immune to their power. Chris Paul became the example of what happens when you don't play by their rules. Every subsequent trade and team change in Chris Paul's career can be viewed through this lens. The Clippers trade happened because the league allowed it, but they made sure CP3 ended up with a franchise that had never won anything. When he went to Houston, they were good, but not good enough to beat Golden State. Phoenix was his last real shot, and even then they came up short. Now let's get to the real tea about what happened with the Raptors, because this situation is more calculated and disrespectful than people realize. The fact that Chris Paul had to announce his retirement on social media without any fanfare or ceremony shows how little respect the league gave him at the end. Compare that to how other superstars have been treated. Kobe got a farewell tour, Tim Duncan got tributes from every team, even Carmelo Anthony got more respect when he retired. Chris Paul's retirement statement was beautifully written and showed his class and character, but you could read between the lines and see the disappointment. When he wrote, "While this chapter of being an NBA player is done, the game of basketball will forever be ingrained in the DNA of my life," he was trying to convince himself as much as his fans that this was the right decision. The timing of the retirement announcement, just hours after being waived by the Raptors, tells you everything you need to know about how this affected him. This wasn't a planned retirement where he had time to process and prepare. This was a reaction to being disrespected one final time by an organization that saw him as nothing more than a salary cap. What's even more heartbreaking is that Chris Paul probably had more basketball left in him. At 39 years old, he could have still contributed to a contending team, could have been a valuable mentor and leader. But the way the Raptors situation played out, combined with the lack of interest from other teams, probably made him realize that the league had moved on from him. The retirement statement also revealed Chris Paul's priorities at this stage of his life. He wrote, "I now know wholeheartedly the best teammate I can be is to Jada, Chris II, and Cam." After 21 years of putting basketball first, he was finally ready to put his family first. But it shouldn't have taken getting disrespected by the Raptors for him to make that decision. But here's what this really exposes about the NBA. It's a business first, and loyalty means nothing when you're no longer profitable. Chris Paul spent his entire career trying to win a championship, dealing with injuries, leadership challenges, and constant criticism. He never got his ring, and now he's retiring after being disrespected by an organization that used him as a tax write-off. This sets a dangerous precedent for future Hall of Fame players. If they can do this to Chris Paul, a 12-time All-Star, future Hall of Famer, and one of the greatest point guards ever, what does that say about how the league values its legends? What message does this send to current players about how they'll be treated when they're no longer in their prime? The ripple effects of this situation go beyond just Chris Paul. Young players are watching how the league treats its veterans, and it's not a good look. When you can trade a Hall of Famer like he's a second-round pick just to save money on luxury taxes, that sends a message that nobody is safe, that loyalty is a one-way street. This is part of a larger trend in the NBA where older players are being devalued and discarded as soon as their production declines or their contracts become inconvenient. We've seen it with other legends, players who gave everything to the game but were pushed out unceremoniously when they were no longer useful. The salary cap system, while designed to create competitive balance, has also created a culture where players are viewed primarily as financial assets rather than human beings with feelings and legacies. The Raptors' treatment of Chris Paul is the perfect example of this. They saw a contract that could help them avoid luxury tax penalties, not a future Hall of Famer who deserved respect. What's particularly frustrating is that the NBA markets itself on the personalities and stories of its players. But when those same players reach the end of their careers, the league treats them like disposable commodities. Chris Paul's story, the kid from North Carolina who became one of the greatest point guards ever, should have ended with celebration, not with a salary dump to Toronto. The league's treatment of Chris Paul also reflects broader issues with how aging is viewed in professional sports. Instead of valuing experience, leadership, and basketball IQ, the focus is always on athleticism and production. Chris Paul could still contribute to a winning team, but because his contract was expensive and his athleticism was declining, he was seen as a burden rather than an asset. The one thing missing from Chris Paul's incredible resume is an NBA championship, and that absence will unfortunately define how some people remember his career. But that's not fair to his legacy or his impact on the game. Basketball is the ultimate team sport, and individual greatness doesn't always translate to team success. Look at the context of Chris Paul's career. He played during the era of super teams and dynasties. The Lakers, Celtics, Heat, Warriors, and other championship teams had multiple Hall of Fame players and perfect circumstances. Chris Paul was often carrying teams that were good but not quite good enough to win it all. The closest he came was with Phoenix in 2021, and even then the Suns lost to a Milwaukee team that had Giannis Antetokounmpo playing at a historic level. Sometimes the best player doesn't win, and that doesn't diminish what Chris Paul accomplished throughout his career. The ring obsession in basketball culture is unfortunate because it reduces complex careers to simple narratives. Chris Paul's impact on the game goes far beyond championships. He changed how the point guard position is played, he elevated every team he joined, and he showed what true leadership looks like on the basketball court. So here's where we stand. Chris Paul, one of the greatest point guards in NBA history, just retired after being disrespected by the Toronto Raptors and the league as a whole. This wasn't just a business decision. This was a calculated move that showed how little the NBA values its legends when they're no longer profitable. Based on everything we've analyzed, this situation exposes the cold reality of professional sports. Loyalty is a one-way street, and even Hall of Fame players can be treated like commodities when it comes to saving money on luxury taxes. The Raptors used Chris Paul as a salary dump, never intending for him to actually contribute to their organization. Chris Paul deserved better than this. He deserved a ring, he deserved respect, and he deserved a proper send-off after 21 years of excellence. Instead, he got used as a financial instrument and had to retire quietly after being waived by a team that saw him as nothing more than a contract to manipulate. The reactions from Carmelo Anthony, Ashley Nicole Moss, and other members of the basketball community showed that this treatment was wrong and disrespectful. Chris Paul was a certified legend who should have been celebrated, not discarded like a role player whose time had passed. But despite how his career ended, Chris Paul's legacy is secure. Second all-time in assists and steals, 12-time All-Star, member of the NBA's 75th anniversary team. Those accomplishments can't be taken away by how the Raptors treated him in his final days. The point guard is gone, but his impact on the game will live on forever. He showed what true leadership looks like, what dedication means, and how to elevate everyone around you. The fact that he never got a championship ring doesn't diminish what he accomplished. It just shows that sometimes the best players don't win, and that's the cruel reality of team sports. What's your take on how the NBA and the Raptors handled this situation? Do you think Chris Paul got the respect he deserved, or was this just cold business as usual? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because this story shows exactly how the league treats its legends when they're no longer useful. Respect to Chris Paul for everything he gave to this game, even if the game didn't always give it back to him. The point guard's legacy will live on, regardless of how disrespectfully his career ended.